Okay, I'll open the meeting of the City of Kerrville Planning and Zoning Commission at 4:30. Dorothy, would you call roll, please?
Bob Waller.
Here.
Garrett Harmon.
Here.
Trisha Byram.
Here.
David Jones.
Here.
Rustin Zuber.
Here.
Jim Brown.
Here.
Bill Morgan.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. We do have a quorum. Number one on the agenda, any person with business not scheduled on the agenda is encouraged to briefly speak to the commission. Fill out the speaker request form, give it to the secretary prior to the meeting. Number of speakers limited to the first 10. Each speaker limited to 3 minutes. No formal action can be taken on these items as the Open Meetings Act requires. Formal action items be posted on an agenda no later than 72 hours before the meeting. If formal action is required, the items will be placed on an agenda for a future meeting. While I have several speaker request forms, do any of those fall under the visitor citizens form? Something that's not on the agenda. Yes, ma'am.
They went out the same door. Very good.
Okay. Could you state your name and address, please?
My name is Peggy McKay. My address 103 West Chester, Kerrville. In the paper, we had a posting that we were going to have also the sign at the Chamber of Commerce, and I notice it's not on the agenda tonight. This is the second time it's been pulled, and my first question is, why does this keep getting pulled? It's already up, it's already operating, but if it's in the paper to have a hearing, that means it hasn't been presented to you yet, but we have an operational sign. How can that be?
Well, number one, they pulled that agenda item voluntarily. They want to wait till a later date or until after the sign ordinance committee review committee has met and come up with the recommendations back to planning and zoning. Drew, would you like to address the second part of her question?
The current operation is within the sign code, limited to the 32 square feet.
I'm sorry, I can hardly hear you.
Sorry. The current operation of that sign is within the limitations of the sign code. The portion that they're operating is 32 square feet, which is allowed by code.
Okay, so you're saying it wouldn't apply, I mean, if I wanted to put a sign up, I could put it up and have it operational as long as it was under the 32 feet? Is that what you're saying?
As long as it meets the sign code for that property, yes.
Since this exceeds it, then that you're saying that sign is within the footage.
The current operational portion that they're using is within the square footage.
Why would it have been published in the paper then, twice?
I can address that. I'll address that for you. When it's my turn, I'll address that for you.
Well, Walt, why don't you come on up and give us your name and address and address that, please.
Yeah, happy to do so. Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Walter Koenig. I'm currently president and CEO of the Kerrville Area Chamber of Commerce. I'm also executive director for the Kerr Economic Development Corporation. I served on the steering committee for the Kerrville 2050 Comprehensive Plan, and I was also honored to be the chairman of the Economic Development Subcommittee for that same effort. I want to briefly address the Chamber and EDC's position regarding the digital sign project currently installed at our location. While we've chosen not to seek a variance at this time, we do reserve the right to do so in the future. Our case for a variance is compelling. The project was fully permitted prior to construction, and the requirement for a variance was only made after the project was complete. Additionally, there's precedence in the area for an even larger sign doing the same functions, Antler Stadium. The objections to the sign, as I understand it, are primarily individual, where support for the project is institutional. The vast majority of our chamber's nearly 1,000 members support the project. Many of the leading organizations in the city either support the project or have no specific objection to the project. Despite our strong case for the variance, we feel it's better at this time to address the issue in a more comprehensive way. During my service as chair of the Economic Development Subcommittee, we identified the need to upgrade many of our city codes, including the sign codes. We discussed at length working on tailoring the codes to meet the needs of the specifically defined catalyst zones, rather than taking a one-size-fits-all approach. I understand that this process for the updating of the codes in some cases is underway, and in some cases will take place in the future. Given the level of interest, obviously, in this topic on a variety of fronts, the Chamber of Commerce and the Economic Development Corporation encourages the updating of the sign code as a matter of priority. Such updates will clarify the codes and make them more consistent. The updates will also give the opportunity to reflect the current technological state of the art for 21st century signage. The updates, if done in an inclusive way, ensure that the wants and needs of the business community and the community at large are fairly reflected. The Chamber and the EDC anticipate that our representatives will be integrally involved in this process, and that this process will happen sooner rather than later. Through our involvement in this process, the voice of the business community will be heard, and our economic development efforts will be facilitated rather than hindered in the future through the resultant code revisions. We look forward to an inclusive and thorough treatment of this issue and are sure that the resultant product will be fair and consistent with the principles of the Kerrville 2050 plan. The Chamber and EDC are standing by to support this effort on a priority basis. I want to thank you all for your service and look forward to working with you all in the future to make this a better community and to adjust these codes accordingly. Thank you so much.
Ms. McKay, does that answer your question?
I still don't understand why a variance would be required if you have a working sign. Why will you come back and get a variance later? That's
Because we're not using the full sign, we're using just part of the sign.
But the whole structure is there. If the structure is there, then how will you deal with Calvary when their structure is not there yet, but yet you have a sign that's within, as I understand, pretty close to the same square footage that they are going to come up with? And I don't understand that if we're talking footage, square footage, the whole structure's there, but you only use part of it, but the whole thing is there. Well,
The sign,
at Calvary.
the sign itself at the chamber was permitted. They're coming back for a variance to use the whole sign as electronic. We've said they've withdrawn that request, but during this time, they've reduced their electronic piece to 32 square feet. And so it's an approved sign, permitted sign, and they're not asking for a variance this time. And that's what Mr. Paxton was saying. That's why they can operate.
So the overall size of the sign meets code. The electronic portion of the sign, if they use the whole thing, is what they're looking for the variance.
Okay,
So what they're only using is part of the electronic portion of the sign.
Okay,
But
but,
the overall size meets code.
okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other statements for the Visitor Citizens Forum? If not, we'll move to the consent agenda. All items listed below the consent agenda are considered routine or ministerial in nature and will be enacted with one motion. There will be no separate discussion of items unless the commissioner or citizen so requests, in which case the item or items will be removed from the consent agenda, considered separate. Item 2A, approval of the minutes from the January 3rd, 2019 meeting. They start on page 3. Now, Dorothy Allen saw one typo on bottom of page 5, where it should be small craft. Third line up. Or is that intended to be a mall craft type of business? Page 5.
Maybe it was mall/craft. I'm not sure.
Craft mall.
Craft mall.
If you just check and make sure the right verbiage is in there for that. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as corrected.
I have a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
I have a second. All in favor, raise your right hand. Passes 5-0.
I wasn't there.
Okay, passes 4-0. Dave Jones was absent from that.
Sorry,
meeting.
Chairman.
Yes,
You'd still have to vote even though you were not present.
Right. I'll vote for it.
okay. Passes 5-0. Thanks, Drew. Okay. I've had a request to alter the numbers on 4A and 4B based on the fact that I presume most people are here for 4A. And there's a request for Calvary Temple. Is that okay with the commission?
I'll make a motion to take the items, the agenda items out of order.
Okay, we have a motion to change those 2 items.
I'll
We have a second. All in favor, raise your right hand. Passes 5-0. Okay, so we'll move to item 4B, public hearing, consideration, and action to recommend an ordinance to change the zoning. Drew?
Thank you, Chairman. This is 4B, a public hearing and consideration and action to recommend an ordinance for a change of zoning from the planned district development to the airport district on approximately 23.84 acres, consisting of lots 1 and 2, block 1 of the OLH subdivision, lots 1 and 3, and a portion of lot 2, block 2 of the OLH subdivision within the City of Kerrville, more commonly known as 235, 575, 581, and 601 Peterson Farm Road. That's these 3 portions you can see of the OLH property. The request is consistent with the Kerrville 2050 comprehensive plan. Subject property is within Catalyst area number 11, which encompasses the airport and many of the surrounding areas. Adjacent properties are zone PD, and several properties to the north, east, and south are outside the city limits. The current PD has the listed uses for single-family residential, student and faculty and staff of the secondary or elementary school, which is developed, and multifamily for the student, faculty, and or staff of the secondary and elementary school, and the elementary school and the secondary school. The airport district has the listed uses you can see there on the table that Highway 27 is designated as a primary arterial and built to serve the high traffic volume of corridors along longer distances coming in and out of Kerrville. Here's a few photographs of the property and the adjacent properties. Staff recommends a case for your approval, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions after the public hearing.
So Drew, it's just these areas in the red, right?
That's
They're
correct.
changing.
Yeah, the remainder of the property will remain in the PD as listed.
Right, thank you, Drew. This test call for a public hearing. I'll open the public hearing at 4:45. Anybody wishing to make any comments to the commission, approach the podium, give us your name and address.
Featherstone, 200 Peterson Farm Road. My question is, when you do this, when you change the zoning from the PDD to airport district, what are the benefits? And why would you change this one part? Why wouldn't you change the whole piece to airport district? What is the benefits for the school, or what are the benefits of spot zoning as opposed to changing the whole zone?
Drew, do you have any comments on that? All right, no, Bruce is here.
Yeah, Bruce is here representing the applicant as well.
Would you like, can you address that?
Bruce, you want to come up?
I'd be glad to let Drew answer, but I'll answer any questions that he can't fill in the blanks on. Go ahead.
Okay.
Beautiful.
The original PD was for the school itself and the property that they owned. They are looking to sell or develop these other pieces outside of the bounds of the school itself. So leaving the school in the PD was additional protection for the school and the property surrounding it. The area outside of it falls within the comprehensive plan for the airport district. This property lies within the flight path of the runway, the main runway, so that the airport district is appropriate. And if the PD were not there, the recommendation for the entire property would be the airport district.
Is this in the flight path?
Yes, it is.
What can be built there?
The list is right before you.
But I mean, there's certain height restrictions as well.
There are height restrictions following the federal, the FAA guidelines.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I don't like the idea of a cocktail lounge at a school, but.
Well, I think there's restrictions on distance in that regard.
I'll address that.
Okay, Bruce.
We looked at
Address, please.
Bruce Strachey, 615 Earl Garrett. We looked at the other prominent zone out there is E29, as I recall, and that's a much more manufacturing and industrial district, and so it really wasn't appropriate for what the current owners and some folks who are interested in some of that property have in mind there, want to do something more consistent with the airport district. We originally approached them to amend the PD, but we're really trying as a city to stick with zoning districts rather than using planned development districts as a practice. And so in our meetings with staff, that was suggested, and we found a way to go through that. To address the cocktail lounge, that was a concern of the school as well, but state liquor laws do not allow a cocktail lounge to be adjacent to a school. And it's not a front door to front door situation with a cocktail lounge, it's adjacent property line. And so there is one lot that would be block 1, lot 1, that's farther down Peterson Farm Road, where, as I understand, and I'm not an expert in the state liquor laws, but as I understand the state liquor laws, that may be far enough away, but none of the properties that actually touch the PD and are contiguous or adjacent to it meet the state law to be a cocktail lounge. So that was one of the things when we brought in an amendment to the PD, cocktail lounge was not on the list. So there likely will end up being a deed restriction, to be honest with you. I can't promise that, but that's been talked about with the board at the school.
I don't want to speak for the landowner, but it looks like they're using this property and they can be selective on who they sell it to.
Yes.
For the benefit of the school.
Yes, our firm has been hired to market that property to a specific list, Bob.
One thing we have to remember, though, is that once it is sold, the new owner may not have the same concerns.
Deed restrictions.
But I think that the state liquor laws probably will address that issue.
Right, and I can tell you that deed restrictions are already in this negotiation, so I can't promise you what they are because I don't have a deal.
Okay, thank you, Bruce.
You're welcome.
Anybody else to speak at the public hearing? Hearing none. Oh, yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Kim Lopez. I live at 116 Cardiff Street. And Split Rock Road runs right behind the back of my house. And as I'm reading this, it seems like there may be some plans to maybe develop that road or something. There's ideas of that. Is there? Because there, as you were showing pictures of that, there's a snippet of the corner of my backyard fence in the pictures that you were showing. As a matter of fact, it's right there in that bottom photo. So it concerns me if there's plans to develop that road at any point.
I can't trust that. Bruce?
There currently are no plans to develop Split Rock Road, and we have had conversations with TxDOT about creating a drive access to that piece on Highway 27 that's a portion of Lot 2, Block 2, and so the Split Rock Road isn't on our radar at all. And I believe that's a public right-of-way. I don't want to touch a public right-of-way.
Is that a treasure question? Okay. Any other comments? If not, I'll close the public hearing at 4:51. Commissioners' comments? If not, I'll accept the motion.
I have a question for Drew. Did y'all consider doing different zones for those three pieces of the property, or?
No, the original discussion we had with Mr. Strakey was to amend the current PD, but again, with our policies leading away from PDs, felt that the airport district was more appropriate.
Yeah, it just seems like the one on the 27 has got a very different frontage than the one.
Right.
Peterson Farm Road.
I move that the zoning change be approved.
I have a motion. I have a second.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, raise your right hand. Passes 5-0. Thank you. Okay, we'll go back to 4A. Public hearing, consideration of action concerning two variance requests.
We're going to do 3A first.
Oh, excuse me. Discussion items. My fault. Should have been bigger print. Okay, discussion items. Drew.
Thank you, Chairman. 3A is a discussion item regarding research that staff has done on the sign code based on the January meeting where we introduced the two sign variances. Following those introductions, staff agreed to bring back the commission a little more information based on our current sign code, similar cities, and how the signs, the two variances that were proposed at that time, how they fit within those guidelines. Kerrville Planning Commission has always, and the Zoning Board of Adjustment has always looked very carefully at variances to ensure that they're not effectively changing code through those variances. If you think back to the Peterson Hospital pole banners that came before the commission a little over a year ago, the variance wasn't really an appropriate direction for that project, and we brought back a code amendment at that point for different allowances for those pole banners. Since it didn't really fit within the scope of the sign code, we reviewed that as a code amendment. Similarly, commission asked us to look at these two variances and see if that would be appropriate for a code change rather than two individual variances. Given the code review committee is underway as an implementation item from the Kerrville 2050 plan, one of the items they've been tasked with is the sign code. So knowing that that committee is going to look at the sign code in the next few months, or next several months, staff doesn't feel that it'd be appropriate to make an amendment to the sign code now when the entire code is going to be reviewed. within the next several months. Instead, staff would recommend that the commission look at the variance that's before you today, both on the individual merits and as a potential recommendation to the code review committee as they look into the sign code and that review. Staff has also reviewed several other cities. Above all, most cities look at signs differently. There's obviously some overlap, but it is very independent to those communities. Many cities do not regulate electronic signs or changeable copy signs any different than their total signage. Some look at a square footage limitation similar to the current Kerrville code, and some look at more of a percentage basis based on their total signage allowed. Here's a table of several cities around the state, some very similarly situated to Kerrville, some not as similar, whether it's location or size. As you can see, the requirements vary quite a bit between city to city. Again, some of them are based on a percentage, some based on square footage, and some there is no limitation, electronic versus the static portion of the sign. The percentage limitations range from electronic signs being prohibited all the way up to 100% allowed, where the entire sign could be digital. Several cities at 25%, 50%, and 75% allowed digital portion based on those signs. Some limit the type of sign that they can go on, whether it's a freestanding or a monument sign. And again, staff would recommend that we look at the variance before you as both its individual merits and then a possible recommendation to the code review committee. And with that, please answer any questions.
Okay, this is a discussion only between the commissioners and staff to try to come up with a consensus recommendation or individual recommendations from each of the commissioners to be taken forth to the sign ordinance review committee. And
it's not an action item, so just some general consensus if there is any specific direction. If not, we can take the direction from the actual variance after the public hearing and use that as the direction to the code review committee.
oh, this goes from A to Z.
Yeah, I covered everything.
Yeah, what I'm going to do, this is an open discussion, so if you've got comments, it's a good time to address Drew or just talk about it.
The code review committee, when do we expect them to be tackling this particular part of the code?
Sometime during the summer. Right now, they're working on the zoning code. They're going to look at that on February 13th as the first draft. Then they'll go through several other public meetings and then back to the code review committee early summer, then on to city council. We're also looking at the subdivision regulations and then several other auxiliary development codes. So I suspect early to mid-summer is when they'll be introduced to the sign code discussion, but that may not be till early fall before they start making any final recommendations from the consultant.
I know the state has directed municipalities regarding signs. We no longer can really address the copy on the signs, I understand.
That's correct. Based on case law and legislative action, the message contained within the sign is not really under the city's purview. That falls more under your freedom of speech. So the on-off premise discussion is very limited from a signage standpoint. So we are looking at just the sign requirements based on location, height, size, and types of signage, being freestanding or monument, pole signs, and so on.
Yeah, I understand in that regard, they're not going to distinguish any longer between a monument sign and
That's independent for each city.
billboard sign.
Yeah, you still could look at monument signs, freestanding signs, pole signs.
Okay.
Your true outdoor advertising billboards are still regulated through the state on state right-of-way. as a separate land use. But as far as the city's regulation of what's contained within the signed copy, we are very limited on what those regulations are.
Drew, what dictates the range of size, like freestanding sign, 100 square feet to 200 square feet? What dictates that size?
Most cities look at the street frontage of the property,
Our code,
and our code does as well. So once you get to a certain size of property, you go from 100 to 200 square feet, maximum
the only
allowed.
two options, 100 or 200?
Well, it's greater than 400 is one.
I'm sorry,
Greater than 400,
right, over 400 square
you can
feet
go to 200.
goes up to 200 square feet.
Same for the monument.
Correct.
Based on size of the property?
Based on the street frontage, the linear frontage of the property on the main street.
Frontage.
Yeah, just the frontage.
There are some cities that regulate the maximum size by zoning district. There's some that base it on acreage of the property rather than the frontage. But that, I think, more commonly found would be the width or the linear footage of the front of the property, since that's a direct impact to the street.
Does it make any sense to base it on the use? For example, kind of tie it into the amount of parking that's required?
From a planning perspective, I would say it doesn't, because that would limit the future use of the building and how the signage is approved. So if you had use A that's allowed a certain square footage, if that building changes use, then the sign would have to change as well. So you end up with a lot of conflicting regulations at that point.
Okay.
My only comment, I read through our sign ordinance pretty well. I've been looking at electronic signs for the last month. Every time I drive by, I'm almost driven more about what the copy is as opposed to the size of the sign. If you have too much copy and the letters are too small, I think that's more of a safety hazard than having a big sign with
There are a few cities that I found in Texas that actually do limit the size of the letters, both minimum and maximum size. Most of that's going to be found in your operational requirements, whether there's any animation allowed or not. Most of the cities you can see in this list, I guess I didn't put that requirement on there, excuse me. Most of the cities researched do not allow any animation. There's several studies showing that the animation is more distracting than a static image. And based on that timing, Kerrville's is 4 seconds for a static image. I believe the state is 7 or 8 seconds. Some cities go up to 10 or 15 seconds per page of that digital sign. So it really is, you're driving by, you really see it as just one static sign because you're only going to see one of those messages. So you don't have the leading messages, and you don't have that animation trying to watch to see what word or what letter's coming up next.
Well, in that regard, I know our sign ordinance does not allow tag along.
Correct. Yeah, no tag along or leading
Okay,
messages.
here's the 3 things we're offering. And it keeps your attention till the next group comes out,
That's
which
correct.
I like.
Yeah, keeping the message to one page is a large safety factor, and it's a beneficial safety factor. With the static messages, one message per page.
Bob, I think that some of the older signs are pretty restricted on the size of what they can fit on there because of the technology. So I think if you were to,
And if the size were larger.
yeah, I think it really restricts their use of the sign because it is just older technology and not quite as clear as what the newer products are.
Looking at the resolution from the older single bulbs to the kind of the smaller LEDs now, where the resolution's more like the TV screen than it is your old scoreboard where you've got individual lights.
Well, I was driving down South 16th the other day where the new bank is. When you have the time, the temperature, that's fine. And what day of the week it is. But when I drove by last week, they had about 6 or 7 rows of verbiage. And it was in red, hard to distinguish what it was. But what I found is it really just take your eyes off the road to focus on that sign unless you were stopped at a light. And to me, that's the danger part, as opposed to what size the sign is.
I think most of your, whether it's the sign company directing the user or the user, eventually find that balance as far as what's effective marketing. You're not trying to put a magazine ad on the sign because you're not going to see that level of detail. So through that programming, I've seen a lot of businesses change the way they program from day one of the sign to a year later when they've seen how the sign actually operates. Whether Kerrville wants to look at that as a regulation through the code review committee, or if kind of let the market judge itself on that as far as how they program those signs.
Well, I do like your thoughts about percentage of the sign being electronic. I think that makes sense. So you got 100 square foot that you're allowed to have advertising with. 50 feet is all that can be electronic. 32 feet sounds small, but 32 feet is a piece of plywood. So if you really want to know what my analogy is. But for some signs, there may be plenty. Other signs, it may not be large enough to do what they want. So if you have a Calvary Temple that we'll talk about later, they have 200 square feet. So they would be allowed at 50%, 100, but yet they're just asking for like 72. And so at this point, it's a variance. But based on what the review committee does, it could well be within,
Right, may or may not.
without being a variance.
And staff would recommend considering it under a percentage similar to the total area of the sign. We base that off the width of the property so that you have kind of proportionality through small properties have smaller signs, large properties have larger signs. Similar to that, the portion of the digital on those signs would be
My
based on a
concern there would
percentage.
be that if, let's just say that Calvary Temple was able to put that sign closer to the road because their property actually went to the road, that's a lot of sign right on the road. And if we had some sort of something built, I think there needs to be more into that than just 50% of the sign. I mean, maybe it's up to 50% of the sign if you're X feet off the road. Get it away from, that's a huge sign if you were just to drive. Yeah, the setback. I think that has to be a consideration on some of those.
Some cities do have setbacks for signage, whether that's based on area or height. I don't recall which city off the top of my head, they actually had allowances for larger signs than their standard permitted sign if you had additional setbacks.
Right, that makes sense.
I think the issue there based on the comments, the public comments from the Kerrville 2050 process, that amount of detail in the sign just becomes very restrictive because you have so many different moving parts. The code becomes very complicated. But that is certainly, some cities have considered that as far as setting the sign further back, then it can be taller and larger because you are further away. Whereas if you're close to the street, it's a shorter, smaller, less intrusive sign.
Tricia, something else to think about is that we have to remember that Loop 534 won't always be the same size as it is now.
True.
At some point, Loop 534 could look very much like Sidney Baker does now. And so not only are we looking at the size, but we're looking at the amount of traffic, the speed limit, and trying to, envision what could happen in the future with that. I am inclined to, probably not a very popular opinion in this room right now, but I tend to lean more restrictive on the electronic signs just because I do see it as a safety issue. I agree 32 feet is fairly small, and I think there might be a happy medium in there that, I'm sure will be discussed at the, during the review of the sign code. But to me, a 6 by 12 feet is probably too large. Those signs are meant to draw attention to them. It's marketing. It's our job. It's what they do. So, to me, the larger sign, the more effective it is at drawing your attention, which means it's drawing your attention away from the road if you're driving. That's my main concern. I think that the restriction now is probably a little too tight, but I do think that in the discussion of a percentage of the sign being approved to be electronic, that there should be a maximum size that should go along with that.
So maybe a percentage of the sign maxed out at a certain sign.
Percentage of a sign up to a certain point.
We have two types of signs in our code, correct? Monument and freestanding?
We have lots of different types of signs. As far as the signs that you're off the building, freestanding signs,
What we're
primarily
today are
right.
freestanding and monument.
That's correct.
With an electronic portion of it. Okay, so what determines you can have either one on either property?
Each property is allowed one sign up to a certain.
One of each of those you can choose?
No.
One or the other.
One or the other. Once you reach a certain linear footage of the street, you are allowed a second sign. Again, it just depends on.
You can choose either a monument or a freestanding?
Right. For most properties, that's the case. Some cities allow a monument only. They don't allow any kind of pole or pylon sign. Some cities consider them one and the same. They're both a freestanding sign because it's not a building sign. So again, the kind of going from A to Z on those requirements, whatever fits Kerrville.
Different signs on a pole and one is not?
Right.
They can be a pole even with stuff around it, stucco.
Right, then you get kind of into the construction of it. I mean, a lot of your monument signs, the sign itself is probably still on a pole, but then it's anchored with stone or brick to match the building or stucco.
All the way to the ground.
As a kind of a surround to the sign. And that's fairly common.
And they both have a maximum height, correct?
Yes.
One sign's lower than the freestanding?
Oh, depending on the property.
Let me go back to what Garrett said a while ago. I think a lot of what we do is minutia bound. We're looking at detail and we're looking at, what I think overriding consideration is that you want to, we need to know that the actions that we take are doing some sort of variance or some change or something like that that's going to cause any possibility of harm. And so when you talk about setback and then therefore larger and this, that, and the other, and we have studies and we have all these variations, we still have the fact that people are distractible, drivers are distractible, and whatever else. And so whatever we do, we have to keep in mind that safety is the main consideration. Getting out a message is important. I've sold and presented a company all my life, and so you always want to do more and more, but you also have to keep the public in mind. And so with that overall umbrella of whatever it is we're going to look at or what we're going to do and whatever, and plus the fact that we're looking at in the city of Kerrville is spending quite a bit of money on consultants that are specifically looking at all sorts of parts of the zoning for this city and specifically the sign ordinance. I really think that waiting until we get a better picture on this or whatever it is that we're going to try to do, I think we need to take a look at that. Because I heard you say an ugly word in the middle of just passing. You said there is case law that is dictating sign size and signage and whatever. Could you speak to that just a little bit more? And is there quite a bit of interest in that area? Or?
Sorry, the case law is more specific to the message contained in the sign and violation of free speech. So kind of the layman's
Just
terms.
at that level, it's not at the level of the comments.
That you caused an accident from having a sign.
Exactly.
I think that's what,
It's geared more towards First Amendment rights, freedom of speech, that if the inspector has to read the sign to enforce the code, then you've exceeded beyond that freedom of speech.
Okay, well, all right, yeah, I'm not gonna get off on that side of it.
So the,
I'm staying on distraction and off the road and whatever else, and there's case law on that.
that specific case law does not get into size, location, operational requirements.
The only other point that I would bring up, since the level of interest is obviously as high as it is the agenda for the zoning set. I mean, they will not get to looking at the sign ordinances until the summer. Could that, any flux in that at all?
We've got some flexibility, but the primary or the priorities have been set as zoning and then subdivision regulation. Obviously, those are much larger code in volume, if nothing else, to get through, and then become the other auxiliary development signs or development codes, which is where the sign code was placed. So it's kind of the third tier priority.
I was talking about safety. There's so many things out there to me more distracting than a road sign. You know, you reach in the station on your deal. I don't care if you got, hands-free. You still have to dial the number. You have to look at your recents. You're doing all that stuff. People run red lights every day, and they're only looking at the road. When they hit cars in front of them. So, safety is a concern. I think the safety more concerned me is the size of the copy, the brightness of the sign, the animation of the sign, as opposed to just having just a basic sign, like what we presented with later, that just has a short message. So I guess at this point, let me put you on the spot. You've been looking at this, you did this research. Let me ask you, what conclusions maybe have you drawn as far as a recommendation?
I think the percentage approach for the size of the electronic versus the total area of the sign is certainly more equitable based on the width of the property rather than just a specific number. And I think a big part of it's going to be the public input on what Kerrville is looking for, both from a business and promotion standpoint and the citizens that live here. I think that's the largest factor in the variations of sign codes from one city to the next. Big or small, all cities are regulated independently on sign code. So I think the biggest recommendation I would have is looking at the percentage approach, just so that it is more congruent to the size of the property rather than just a number. For example, if you had a 45-foot square foot sign and 32 square foot of it were digital, that certainly looks different on the street than a 200 square foot sign with 32 square foot digital. So it's not proportional at that point.
Okay, thank you. At this point, what I'll ask for is each commissioner to maybe give Drew your thoughts and recommendations for him to carry forward to the committee.
And again, once the code review committee reviews the sign code,
it comes
back to the planning commission for your official input at that point on what their draft is, and then on the city council for final adoption.
David?
Well, I've made a point of continued banner safety and distraction and whatever else. I concur with you, Bob. There's plenty of distractions out there. This seems like one that we can have something to say about. And so I also, having spent a substantial amount of time working on 2050 and the fact that we have made these steps to try to get to where we are, I think that the consultants should do their thing. I also want to commend you, Drew, of the time that you've spent on pulling together this information and whatever else. And I just have to say that the percentage method certainly, that speaks to it, and also the frontage, whatever you can common sense, you can conceptually say this all needs to be taken into consideration. But then you have this other overlay of, okay, the further back from the road, the bigger the sign can be. Therefore, the bigger the sign can be, there's more on it, and that's further away. And so, I don't know, so many, and I don't want to get into minutia, as I said earlier on, but I think that you're on the right track, and I think that we should say, all right, let's go ahead and see what the result is. But let's not reinvent the wheel, and you take the first step by seeing what other cities are doing. They all seem to be doing different things, so we need to set our own pace.
Point of clarification, if you would for me, I don't think we're hiring outside consultants for the
Yes.
sign review.
Yes, Kimley.
I know we are for something,
All right, Kimley Horn's working with the code review committee throughout their charge.
but for the signage as well.
What level they're going to be giving recommendations, we don't know yet,
Okay.
but they will be working with the committee still.
Okay. Tricia?
I'm in agreement with Drew. I think our digital portion is a little dated. It needs to be revamped somewhat. I like the idea of a percentage. I think that's probably, like you said, an equitable fashion, but I think it also needs to be capped at a max, maybe for the 100 square foot and then the 200. I don't know what that looks like. I'm also in agreement with Mr. Jones that I think we need to wait for the code review committee to make these recommendations. I think this is a lot of information here and it's not consistent. And so it's not like we can go, oh, look, every city that you pulled up has 25%. So I think that's very difficult for us to make a decision on the fly without considering some other factors.
Mr. Super?
I like the idea of the percentage method also, but I also think the place to really spend time on this is in the code amendment committee.
Okay.
The place to do this type of discussion. Couple of thoughts. If you look at all these communities, it kind of seems like we are kind of in the middle. I know they're kind of all over the place, but if you just kind of in your mind draw a line, we do kind of seem to be right in the middle. Some have bigger signs, some have smaller signs. So we may not be that far off from where we need to be for our size community. I also think changes like this should be small, not huge, big, fast changes when something is working. I believe technology is changing, so we need to make changes, but when you double sizes and things of that nature, it's a pretty big leap. So we should be cautious of those kind of big changes. Also thinking about the Kerrville 2050 plan, and of course, that states we need to encourage business, and I'm all for that. And this is part of that that's been mentioned. But on the other side, also maintaining the small town feel of Kerrville and the protection of the natural surroundings. I think that has to be a part of this digital sign conversation also.
Yeah, and I agree with Rustin on what he just said about the unique character that Kerrville has with its natural surroundings. And I agree with the percentage of the sign being the regulation standard, and I think that there should be a cap to that. As I'd mentioned before, something we need to bear in mind is where a sign is located today may look very different than what that location is like 20 years in the future. And while a certain size may seem fine now, it may be obtrusive later down the road once development increases. So that's my concern. I think that to get into a little bit more detail, 32 square feet is probably a little too small as a maximum size. I think 72 feet is probably too large for maximum size. So like Rustin had commented, somewhere bigger but not double, is maybe a direction to lean. As far as technology goes, these signs are getting better resolution. So the fact is you can actually fit more information in a smaller space. And so you're able to get more detail into that, which can be kind of a double-edged sword. And so those are things to bear in mind.
Okay, my only comment is I like the percentage methodology. If you have real large frontage, you got more time to look at something. If you're going down a long thoroughfare at this point, it may change 20 years down the road. Speed limit may go from 55 to 35, or whatever. But I think we need to look at the percentage. My feeling is somewhere around the 50%, probably not over that, of course, but, maybe, 40 to 50, somewhere in that ballpark. A 100-foot sign could have 40 to 50 square feet. A 200-foot sign could double that. I really think we need to look at putting some kind of minimum on copy letter size, maybe, and no animation at this point. I think that's very distracting. But thank you for your input. You've given us a little better insight of what the industry's doing. Is that enough? Does that help you?
It is. Once the code review committee gets to that, we'll certainly kind of draft that out as far as just the bullet recommendations from the committee. Percentage across the board, something that the commission wants to be considered. We'll see where the public input and the consultant bring back with that. And we'll be back later on this year.
Okay, thank you, Drew. Okay, jump to 4A, public hearing consideration and action.
Thank you. This is originally posted as 2 variances. That was part of their original application. The church has agreed to remove the monument sign. Therefore, they would only have 1 sign on the property, being the proposed sign. So this is only 1 variance to allow the electronic sign to exceed the maximum of 32 square feet by allowing a 12 by 6 or a 72 square foot sign for Calvary Temple Church at 3000 Loop 534. As far as your criteria for review and the findings, there's no exceptional circumstance or condition that is applicable to the property. This property is similar to other properties on the loop as far as the large right-of-way width for the loop, the smaller road section that exists today, and the distance from property line to that road is fairly consistent around the loop. As you mentioned, that roadway may expand as development occurs along the road. There's no necessary hardship from the literal enforcement of the sign code, and it doesn't appear the sign would be detrimental to the health, safety, and welfare of the public or the surrounding properties. The variance request is not contrary to the objectives and principles contained within the comp plan, Kerrville 2050, and the church is located in the strategic catalyst area number 8, which is linked to Tybee High School as kind of the anchor of that catalyst area as the loop continues to develop. Proven hardship has not been identified, and the variance is not the result of the development of the property. The variance is not grounded solely upon the opportunity to make the property more profitable, nor will it repeal any development regulations, and is not affected by any kind of zoning change. And with that, I'd be pleased to answer any questions after the public hearing.
Let's go ahead and open the public hearing. I'll open the public hearing at 5:29. Anybody wishing to make a statement after I go through the speaker request forms, go to the podium, please. State your name and address. Pastor Wade.
thank you all for your time and what you do. I just want you to know that our church prays for y'all because I can't imagine what it must be like, because it's a darned if you do, darned if you don't situation with you guys. And so I appreciate it very much. In response to Mr. Harmon, a 6x12 sign, I noticed in the notes it said 12 by 6, which makes it seem massive. The 6x12 on our property was 700 and something feet of road frontage at 55 miles an hour. We would post single pages, very readable at one glance. And I have to say, John Hagee in San Antonio has a very busy sign, and you cannot drive down 1604. And I know John Hagee. You can't drive down 1604. He's huge. That's his sign. He puts too much information on it. We're not wanting to do that. We're just wanting to put enough. And the difference between us and a dry cleaner or somebody else is we're constantly having things we're offering to the public. And so we need to be able to change those things without spending a fortune on newspaper ads and other things. And so that's one of the purposes of that our people have given so much in trying to get this thing paid for, so that in the long run, as I said the last meeting, we're not going to be selling space on our sign. Nothing wrong with that. If you want to do it, that's between them and God. But we're just going to advertise what our church offers to the community. And I think, as you well know, if you've watched any television, there's a lot of mega churches in the world today. And people will go to where they think it's the most cutting edge. And so it places us at a disadvantage if we have substandard sign compared to people in San Antonio. A lot of people drive from Kerrville to San Antonio to go to church. They drive from Bernie to go to San Antonio. Right now, we have people coming from Junction to our church, Fredericksburg to our church, Ingram to our church, Hunt to our church, Bandera to our church, and surrounding areas, Bernie to our church. So we just want to make sure that what we offer is very readable. And concerning Mr. Jones, your distraction thing, that's my number one concern. My number one concern. Because I noticed some of the signs, and especially since our last meeting, I've been paying close attention to the signs in our city. And like Mr. Waller said, when you're sitting at a stop sign and you see someone is good, that's fine. But when you're going 55 miles an hour, you don't have time to sit there and read the whole sign. So you need a flash so they can instantly see your message and go past it. And at 55 miles an hour, they will go past it relatively quickly. And so I don't think it's unreasonable if we have I don't know if we have the PowerPoint of what the sign looks like. Yeah, it should be there, the slider. Okay.
Martin, can you go back to the other PowerPoint? Sorry.
You want this one? That's what we have, which will come down. That's the same size sign we're wanting as Antler Stadium. There we go. That's it. And it looks huge, but if you look at it, when you're in perspective of going down the road, that's not a huge sign. And we are, Ms. Byron, we are off the road quite a bit because we have a high line wires going right in front of our property, so we have to stay out of the easement of that. And so we're having to push it back, which is the reason we're wanting a bigger sign so that we can flash a message up and it's done. Somebody at the last meeting said, I can read Tivy High School sign just fine. I can read Tivy Fight Never Dies just fine too. I mean, I can't. It's just easy. And on the other side, it'll have the time or it'll have the date. That's simple. But we're different than other things. People know what Tivy High School is. They know what Tivy High School has to offer. We are constantly doing things. This Friday night, we're doing a Princess Ball for our Princess Academy. We've decorated the whole place. They're going to get tiaras and everything. We need to let people know this kind of stuff. Where other things, they don't need to know all that. If you need dry cleaning done, you look at a fixed sign, dry cleaning. You choose who does the best job. But we're constantly changing on what we're offering to the community. And so that's the reason we want a variance. And as I said, that particular picture looks very big. It looks like a John Hagee sign, but if you'll put it in perspective, it's totally nowhere near it. And this sign will be our number one mode of advertising what our church offers to this community. And we offer a lot. By the way, as soon as we get through with our Princess Ball, Tivy High School is going to use our gym for a Sadie Hawkins dance. We decorated it. It's all for them. That's what we do in this community. We help our community. Just a point of reference, in perspective, the two screens y'all have here at this distance is well readable. It's easy. But when you get 300 feet off the road, 500 feet off the road, or even right on it, some of these digital signs, even that size, are very difficult to read. And I find that a safety hazard. We're wanting things to be where you can read it in one glance and not take your eyes off the road. I've looked at all the signs on the loop. The high school one's easy. I think I might even have it memorized. I'm not sure because I see it all the time. And so they don't need to do what we need to do. And we offer youth programs. We offer kids' church programs. We offer marriage classes. We offer all these things. And when we're doing a certain thing, we'd like to be able to put that up. Hey, marriage class, the date, stuff like that. But we're going to do it with quality. Also, as I think you all will understand, my computer needs to be upgraded every 1.5 to 2 years. It's really frustrating because I get a computer, I get used to it, I like it, and all of a sudden, the company I particularly use, they'll change their plugs. You have to get a different computer to plug it in because they've already changed that style. And it's got more hard drive. I've got more hard drive on my phone right now than I did on my first computer. And I remember being here when there were no cell phones in Kerrville. And now I can speak to my car and tell my car what I need done. I can say, Siri, call so-and-so. And I can do all that. Technology, as far as distractions, the screens of the nav systems in our vehicles, to me, like was mentioned earlier, are way more distractive than having a sign that flashes a message up so you can read in one glance and move on. That's all we're asking to do. When I came to Kerrville, there was nothing. We had a bag phone. I thought we were rich when we got that bag phone that weighed like 30 pounds. And we could carry it in our cars. It was nothing. Now look at everything. We went from no phone, we had pagers, then we went to a bag phone, and now we're at a place where all I have to do is point my phone at my face and it'll recognize my features and connect me. So I want to keep, I was born and practically raised here. I've been pastoring here for 33 years this July. So I care about this community. I would do nothing to diminish the value of Kerrville, Texas. I love it. My wife and I often say, I just love our community. We love it. And I would do nothing to diminish from the beauty of our community. All we're wanting is to help us stay a little bit on the same page with people just a few miles down the road. And we're not asking for a 100 square foot sign, by the way. That's been mentioned a few times. I would like it. I mean, I'll be honest with you. But we're not asking for that. Just 72 square feet. And I'm sorry I'm taking a little longer than I should. We got self-driving cars nowadays. I remember last time some people stood up to protest because they want to keep Kerrville small. And out of respect, I didn't ask this question. What kind of car did you drive up here in for this meeting? What were you driving when you came today? Was it one that you're wanting to keep back in the day? Did you drive a 1965 Mustang to here? No, most likely they drove a automatic transmission, a air-conditioned, cruise control, that kind of car. So what I'm pointing out is things change. And I don't want it to change, and I totally agree, Mr. Harmon. There's got to be a maximum, because you know as well as I do. You go to San Antonio off Loop 1604, they got everything in the world going on their signs. And it's like billboard-sized signs. And so I agree. I think there needs to be a maximum size, but I do not agree that 6 by 12 is too big considering the property we're on. And so I appreciate you guys' consideration. We'd like to get on with this. This is our second meeting, and we'd really like to get on with it. And, I think if you were to come, you don't have to come visit our church, just call me, and I'll show you around. I'll show you what we do. And to show you that we're community minded. And if the more money we have to spend on advertising is more of a strain because we help so many kids in this community. And so I don't want to spend unnecessary money. That's the reason Calvary Temple has a smaller staff than most churches our size. We run on a conservative basis 1,000 people Sunday, not counting our biker church, not counting our cowboy church. And so we make everybody do what they've got to do. And I have some staff members in here tonight. We do what we have to do, no matter if it fits our job description or not. Because every dollar I have to spend on hiring somebody else is money that's going to come out of helping people in need. And so I appreciate you all. And again, from the bottom of my heart, I really do. I appreciate what you do. I can't imagine, honest to God, pastoring is like a walk in the park, what y'all do. And so I appreciate your time. And I really appreciate if you would prayerfully consider and understand and look in perspective. Drive by our property. Look at the picture that we have where it shows in perspective that sign on our property. It's here somewhere, I'm sure. And
Page 18.
Excuse me?
Page 18.
Page 18, yeah. You can see it on your notes. And it's not that big when you look at it like that. It's really small. And so I appreciate you all. And I pray for you. As I said, our church prays for you. And I tell them, my church is in here. Give me an amen if I do. I have them pray for the Planning and Zoning Commission because these people have to face crazy stuff. And so we genuinely pray for y'all. And so thank y'all so much for your time. And I just really appreciate, in the name of Jesus, if you just say, approved. Hallelujah. Thank
you. Kenny Bledstone.
My name is Kenny Bledsoe. I live at 1308 Paragon Place. And just to add to what Pastor Dell had said, considering a safety issue, and that's been brought up since we got here, having, I guess, the misfortune of driving up on accidents because people aren't paying attention and having to pull people out of cars, watching people die on the side of the road. It's not something I like. I think if you'll really look, just like Pastor said, come by anytime. Church is, we're open, and see exactly where the placement is and how far it is off the road, especially where we are on that loop. It's not a straight stretch of road. You come into that property on a curve, and I don't know about y'all, but I mean, you can do all the research you want. If you're driving this way and looking this way, your tendency is to turn the direction you're looking. If you're heading from the YO around the loop right there, you would be veering into oncoming traffic. And again, coming the other way, of course, in the future, more of that property next to us would be developed. But right now, you wouldn't even see that sign until you're up on it, coming the opposite way from Tybee High School. So it's something to be considered. I mean, not just now, but later on, and I appreciate that. But I'm just saying the location of where it's going to be, the size of the sign and the proportion of it, and what we're proposing to do is something that can be seen probably even in peripheral vision. You get a glance of it and you're going down the road. And it's not something you have to stare at and squint while you're trying to drive by to see. And again, appreciate you guys. Thank you for letting me talk.
Thank you. Richard Most.
I'm Richard Mosty. I'm representing Dr. Wim Rector, who I believe you have in your packets a letter from Dr. Rector. Did all of y'all receive a copy of that? And I speak against the variance. Be assured I do not speak against Calvary Church or any of its members. I agree that they are remarkable, valuable. The church and members are valuable to this community. Having said that, I don't think that that can be one part of your consideration. You can't consider who is applying. You consider what are the present circumstances. The present circumstances are there's an ordinance in place. We spent a long time talking today about could it be tweaked? Could it be changed? But nonetheless, that's the ordinance that is in place. I think that there are, we could talk for a long time about anecdotal evidence about safety. You'll see in the letter that Dr. Rector sent you that studies show the dangers of signage and the distraction that it presents. It also presents, importantly, evidence that younger drivers are more distracted by all things, but signage would be one of them. That comes as no surprise to any of us. And yet that street, that road, undoubtedly has the highest percentage of teenage drivers of anywhere in the city. That everybody at Tybee High School is going somewhere on that road. It also, from a safety standpoint, if you've looked at the property, you know they have moved the sign downgrade, downhill, away from the front of the church. It occurs to me that they could put a sign that complied in the front of the church that would still be of adequate size to promote whatever they were doing. This sign, I disagree with Pastor Way. It is enormous. It is 33 foot tall by 20 foot wide, plus, and of that, more than double the existing sign ordinance for the digital part. The most important thing to me, though, is precedent. You have before you, you have an ordinance in place, you have an application in place, and at some time in the future, someone is going to want a variance, and they're going to look at the precedent that they have, and they'll go and they'll look at what you have before you, the paper. The paper shows that there are no remarkable, the city report shows no remarkable circumstances, no exceptional circumstances, no hardship. There's nothing in the paperwork that indicates what would be the justification for the variance. So if someone were to look at that, one might consider that the difference is who applied rather than what was applied for, and did it in fact, may I have more time?
Yes, sir.
Did it in fact, was there a justification for the change? I think that we can go forever on the safety issue, and there is no study, there is no definitive statement or evidence about that, and it does not appear in your written record that someone might look at a precedent down the road. So I submit to you that any variance that does not have a written and documented reasoning for the variance should be denied, but because of the issue of precedent. So while we are thankful and ask God to continue to bless the church and its members, I think that this is one of those decisions that, based upon the hard data, that the variance should be denied. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Mike Walker.
My name is Michael Walker. I live at 1303 and office at 1303 Vesper, Kerrville. They say confession is good for the soul. I'm going to confess right now. This is all my fault. Back in 1980, when I first moved here, established a business. I'm an architect, but I was the first one to put a restaurant in the old depot. And one of the things that we came up with that spare property in the front is let's just put up a bodacious sign so that everybody will know where we are. You know, there's a big difference between advertising and information. Outdoor advertising can be of some benefit. Let's say if you're on a highway and you're going somewhere, to know where you need to pull off. But there's also a tendency to overdo that. There was an argument for many years that the most successful sign in the United States was the old Holiday Inn sign, because it was big and bodacious and everybody looked at it. And it just sucked people right off the highway and into the rooms. It works. No question about it, it works. It attracts attention. So the question is, are you trying to attract attention or are you really trying to give out information? I was on the team that developed the first sign ordinance. You think your job is tough now. A lot of slings and arrows came our way. Because we're trying to be fair, we're trying not to limit property rights, but by the same token, when I moved here, and I moved from Houston and away from the burgeoning billboard business that was just literally cluttering everything. And I got here, and what happens, the most picturesque, you listed a whole lot of cities there, but there's not a more picturesque city in the state of Texas than Kerrville. And who are we to spoil the nest, so to speak? So the point was that we were going to try to keep it as small town, as clean, as picturesque as we possibly could, but at the same time give people the right to say, this is where my business is. This is what I'm trying to do. The first draft of the sign, or the first sign ordinance, you couldn't have any flashing signs. You couldn't have any reader signs. We've changed this. This is modified over the years. And we've become more informed as to what really works and what really doesn't work. And so I would highly encourage you, by the way, John Hagee was a classmate of mine at Reagan High School. And John was always big, and he will always be big, okay? That's just the way he is. But the same token, you know, we have an obligation to keep this city in some sort of sense of decorum. And while it's really painful to step on people's, just gonna have painful to step on people's property rights and their ability to get the word out, there is a limit. A little over a year ago, my church, the church I attend, went and put a reader board, electronic reader board. I was very emphatic with Pastor Joseph that he not get over 32 feet, you know, and we actually put in a reader sign that was a little less than 32. So the sign we put up was smaller than the one that was up there. Still, I didn't have anything to do with it. He went out there and he got the permit and he jumped through all those hoops. What about all those people that jumped through all those hoops?
Well, where do they stand in this? Do they they get to go back and revise all their signs? So, we gotta be careful when we set standards, because when we do, it doesn't just affect today, it bumps on down the road. And so I think it's important, very important, that we take the emotion out of this and simply get out to what works and what doesn't work. I think Pastor Way makes a wonderful point about the scale and the distance factor. Obviously, if you're traveling at a high speed rate of speed, which, by the way, it's not going to be that way that much longer, it's too dangerous. But the 32 square feet was all right for the Church of Christ down the street. It's okay for Tybee, but are we just going to keep making exceptions and exceptions and exceptions? Are we going to draw the line anywhere? And where do we draw the line that we don't hurt? We tried, when we drew up the sign ordinance, to, make it proportional so that if you had a longer frontage, you got to put up a bigger sign. And granted, the signs were a little bit bigger then than they are now, this by requirement. So time changes everything. But contrary to popular belief, size is important. And size is really what we're speaking of right now, scale to the property they have. These people have a lot of property, and they probably deserve some sort of a variance. So I think we need to look at that sign ordinance as we have done. It has changed a lot since the middle 80s when we first looked at this. I was also on the sign ordinance amortization, of the sign amortization board, where we gave people so much time to get their sign, a non-compliant sign down, but gave them time to get it to pay for itself. So all that off-site advertising that was done, those people, and I will say this, they didn't all take them down when they were supposed to either. So, you got to be careful about whose ox is getting gored. But I think it needs to be fair for everybody. I'd be more than willing to sit on a study committee or whatever y'all want to do, and I'll volunteer to do that with a very open mind. But by the same token, I think we better watch that tripwire that says you can just keep making exceptions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Corey Trout.
Thank you, guys. My name's Corey Trump, 1684 Junction Highway. We're waiting for them to pull up a slideshow for us. I'm just a sign builder, but I'm gonna see if I can follow up a pastor, an attorney, and an architect here. I'm gonna try. All right, so first thing I wanted to make sure, and Drew did point it out in the very beginning, that this isn't two variances. It was originally two variances, but since then, Pastor has decided they are going to take this sign down, the monument sign, if the new sign gets built. Before we get too far into the presentation for Calvary, I'd like to point out that there has been quite a bit of speculation and drama concerning this sign and the Chamber of Commerce sign. I'd like to make it clear, very clear, that this is not a comparison. This is not a competition between the two signs. I don't know how many are on social media, but if you read the garbage that is out there, it is making these two signs a comparison and a competition. That's the furthest thing from what anybody here wants it to become. The only two things these two signs have in common is the unfortunate timing at which they're both coming in front of you at the same time. With that said, what we're here to ask for is for a fair and honest variance hearing for this sign, without any regard to any other signs currently seeking a variance or a permit from the City of Kerrville. Now, I've been in this town building and installing signs for almost 12 years. I was on the committee that was assembled by the city to rewrite the current sign ordinance that you see now. I'd like to, if you give me a minute, go through and give a little bit of history on what was done with that. This sign here, everybody here knows it. It's in front of Ivy Stadium. The digital portion of this sign is 6 foot by 12 foot. It's a total of 72 square foot, same size as we're talking about for Calvary. Many people have asked, how was this sign allowed? At the last meeting, it was stated that this sign was granted a variance because it was exempt as a school. That's just not true. As a matter of fact, the sign was denied a variance in a 3-to-1 vote by Planning and Zoning on November 3rd, 2011. When the sign was built back in 2012, it was permitted under the old ordinance before the new ordinance was adopted. We sent this permit in. It was initially denied. The current ordinance didn't have any language to prohibit permitting this sign. The city asked me and Tyvee's Booster Club, who paid for this sign and donated it to the city, to bring this to Planning and Zoning as an act of good faith. So we did. Went to Planning and Zoning, 3-to-1 vote, it got denied. Booster Club decided to push the issue with the city. Really had no leg to stand on. The sign got permitted, installed, and it's under a grandfather clause now. That's how this sign went up. Now, one more to speak of. We know this sign as well. It's across the street from where we're standing right now. This is 116 and 27 Old National Car Sale. This sign here was the second time in 12 years I've been doing this, I came to P&Z for a variance. But again, this time, it wasn't by my choice. This wasn't for a bigger sign than allowed. Take a look at the map up here right now. When the sign was originally sent in for permitting, it was denied because of the location of the sign. The ordinance prohibits electronic signs in the downtown core district. Downtown core district is described as the area within the bounds of the Guadalupe River on the south, extending north on Clay Street, east on Main Street, north on Earl Gallet, east on Jefferson, and south on Washington to the river. That red dot you see is the sign we're talking about. The ordinance was not clear on both sides of the street. The sign was not in the downtown core district. It was technically across the street from it, but because it was described by street names, it was denied. P&Z never voted on this at all. They sent it back to to City Council to repair the ordinance and put the language in there that it was within that core, not across the street from it, and that one went through. Went through a code change, fixed the code change, we got the permit for that to be done. Now, the reason I wanted to show and explain those two is to make the point. And in 12 years I've been doing this in this town, my company has never come to you and asked for a variance. And the reason is, for one, I respect the ordinance and I respect the issues and values of this community. The variance for Ivy Stadium was not my choice. The city asked me to do it. National car sales needed to be addressed by council instead of P&Z. I was on the committee that was tasked with rewriting the current sign ordinance you see now. I know it very well. I know it better than most people do, but I want to give a little background and hopefully a little recommendation on any changes that will or will not be made to the ordinance in the future. A lot of time, opinions, facts, research, and even some arguing went into writing the current sign ordinance. And one thing I tried to stress is that the ordinance, if it had any sort of loophole in it, it would get exploited. I've seen it several times. As a matter of fact, I've done it a few times. If there's a loophole in an ordinance, Either a business is going to exploit it, a sign company, or another sign company from out of town will exploit it even more. What I'm trying to say is before you open a can of worms with that ordinance, look closely. The next hurdle we had when we wrote that ordinance was trying to write something that was fair to everyone. This is honestly what took the most time in writing this. We would add a rule, maybe 2 rules, a couple different ideas, and then we'd leave it alone until our next meeting. Between meetings, I'd pay attention while riding around town, and I'd always notice a business whose sign would not fit the ordinance if we passed this rule or that rule. This is what I'll tell you we learned. There is no way you're going to write an ordinance that covers fairly all different types of property shapes, sizes, topography, building shapes, sizes, locations, etc. There are just way too many variables to put this into an ordinance, especially for the properties around Kerrville that haven't been developed yet. Everything I just said is the reason we stand in this building today. It's the reason for section 644 of our sign ordinance. The reason for the variance process, variance is not to allow something to someone because of who they are, what they know, how they got where they are, or any of that. A variance option is in place to allow this board, B and Z, to cover the properties that are unique and don't fit perfectly into that sign ordinance that was written. What we're asking for is a complete process of the variance request in a manner in which is legally written inside of the ordinance as it is today. Current sign ordinance lists the criteria as an applicant must meet to be considered or granted a variance. Those criteria are listed in everyone's packet here tonight. I'd like you to open it and look at it with me. We went through it shortly earlier. We didn't really read what the criteria was. The evaluation criteria reads, the Planning and Zoning Commission must use the following criteria in considering variances to this article, and no variance may be granted unless it makes the following findings. A reads that there are exceptional circumstances or conditions applicable to the property on which the application is made related to size, shape, area, topography, surrounding conditions, or location that do not apply generally to other in the same area or in the same zoning district. This is a map of Calvary Temple Church. The current packet that was given out here has one-line answers. No, doesn't meet this. No, it doesn't meet that. What I have to do to get it to read that, I don't know. But I'm here, and I'm going to explain to you each answer. The property we're talking about, Calvary Temple Church, is located on a lot close to 1,000 foot wide. The property shown in red that you see on the map is Calvary's property. The yellow line is the property line along 534. DOT's easement for expansion along this location is over 150 foot wide. Before we even get to the power lines, that the sign has to clear as well. This puts the sign 160 to 170 feet off of the road to the nearest lane of traffic. If you're in the far lane of traffic, you're over 200 feet from the sign. I'm explaining here how this sign has an exceptional circumstance here. 32 square foot is not only going to be unreadable, it's going to be dangerous for drivers, having to read small lettering. A larger, simpler sign, it's simpler, it's easier to read, it makes it safer. We'll go to the next one. That exceptional circumstances or conditions are such that literal enforcement of the provisions of this article will result in an unnecessary hardship inconsistent with the general purpose and intent of this article. Just saying as if you enforce the code as it's written, that it won't cause a hardship. You enforce it as it's written, the man's only allowed a sign that you can't read from the road. It's pretty obvious what the hardship is here. A 32 square foot sign would not be readable from these distances and speeds. Let me also remind everyone the proportions of signs. This property is legally allowed 2 freestanding signs. One can be 200 square foot with 32 feet of LED. It could be another one 100 feet with another 32 square foot of LED. 32 square foot message center on a 100 square foot sign looks great. Built several of them around here. 32 square foot on a 200 square foot sign looks really unproportionate. It doesn't look right. Calvary could, as per the ordinance, put up 2, but they don't want to. They want to put up 1 professional, clean-looking sign. That's what they are looking to do. Go to C, that the granting of such variance will not be contrary to the public interest, materially detrimental to the public welfare, or injurious to the property or improvements in the zoning district or area in which the property is located. You can look behind me. I'm pretty sure we're not too very contrary to the public interest. They're here. Most are here in favor of it. The next part of that is any reason that this sign would be detrimental to public welfare, injurious to public properties. It's just not there, guys. That doesn't even relate. We'll go to D. That the granting of such variance will not be contrary to the objectives and principles contained in the city's comprehensive plan. We just spoke about this for probably an hour in here. After hearing what Drew said and what was mentioned through all of this earlier, it seems the future of the sign ordinance and its potential changes are within the comprehensive plan. We're within that comprehensive plan. Adjusting the ordinance into a percentage-based system instead of square foot regulations makes a lot more sense, I agree. To put it in this perspective, right now the ordinance allows 32 square feet, which is not proportionate to the signs that allow 200, but may work well for a sign that's 100. Basically 32 square feet is 32% of a 100 square foot sign, but it's only 16% of a 200 square foot sign. So if you take the allowed signage, if you take this sign, for instance, 72 square foot EMC, we're only 36% of what we're allowed in our square footage, which fits perfectly into the new ordinance changes going to a percentage base. The next one is E. That the variance to be granted is the minimum variance that will relieve the proven hardship. It's hard to be a sales guy when you have to talk your client down on building a smaller sign. Pastor wanted a much bigger sign. I told him you can't have over 32. But because of your situation, I think you do have the right to get a variance. I think you do have the criteria to meet to get a variance, but not for something ridiculous. Let's go with what's needed to be read and to be seen and to be safe. Next one, F, that the variance is not being granted to relieve the applicant of conditions or circumstances. This is all nothing to do with the church whatsoever. F, that the variance is not grounded solely upon the opportunity to make the property more profitable or to reduce expense to the current or any future owner. I think pastors worry about being profitable since they are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. G, that the variance would not modify or effectively repeal any development or use regulations set forth in a conditional use permit or an ordinance or resolution adopting a developmental site plan or establishing a special use district or planned development district, which are in addition to generally applicable use and developmental regulations set forth by the city zoning code. This particular people's property is not even in city limits. It's in ETJ. Pastor had to ask the city to come inspect his buildings when he had them built. He didn't have to get permits, but he wanted the city's blessing. I don't see how we're going to interrupt any conditional use permits when none were necessary there anyway. 8, that the variance would only affect a specific sign and not such a general nature as to effectively constitute a change in zoning. This goes back to the very first statement I made. The reason for a variance is because there's no way to ever write an ordinance that is going to cover every type of property, building, etc. I have had issues. Building signs, wall signs, you're allowed 12% of the square footage of the building. If it sits on a long ways building and the short end of the building is facing the street, they're only allowed a little bitty sign. But their building may be 600 foot long, but it's only 20 feet wide. That's the reason for variances. That's the reason for you to be here, is to have some legislation to say yes or no on extenuating circumstances. So that's what we're asking for tonight. The final one is no variance may be granted for signs that are listed as prohibited signs. We don't have that. EMCs are allowed, and so are pylon signs or freestanding signs. So with that said, I normally don't give full speeches. I'm normally mainly just here to answer any technical questions for building the sign. Does anyone have any technical questions on the sign that I need to answer? And thank you for your time.
Yeah. The only thing I would ask is, what is your industry saying about variances? How do you speak to that?
Variances, I've done 3 or 4 variances in 12 years. Now, we work well outside of the City of Kerrville. We do a lot in San Antonio. We do some in Corpus Christi. Every time we've had a variance request, though, it was for the building I was just explaining to you, with 600 foot wide, but it was only a 20 foot deep building. That was in Corpus Christi, and most of the time, if you can present your case and fill all of the criteria that is there, that's what it's for. That's what the variance is for. That's been my success rate with it, I guess you should say. I don't know.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else to make talk? Mike?
Yeah, my name is Mike Sigerman. I live at 4000 Comanche Trace Drive. And I was at the first P&Z meeting at the City Council meeting, and I have no doubt that Calvary Temple Church is a tremendous asset to this community, as are all churches in Kerrville, the church that I go to, the church that you go to. I don't think that because it's a church and they have a message to get out is a reason for variance. They may very well be able to get a variance when we review the code and change the sign code, which is coming in the latter part of this year. My opinion would be that you guys reserve the decision to issue this variance and give the code review committee, which was commissioned by the city as part of the comprehensive plan, give them the opportunity to do their job and find out what we need to do, how our sign ordinances need to be changed, come up with a new criteria for electronic signs, for all other kind of signs. And at that time, we're going to know what our sign ordinance is, and then the church, if they can wait 4 or 5 or 6 months, may not even need a variance. The problem with issuing a variance at this time, and I appreciate what the pastor said, that they don't want to do anything that is detrimental to this community, but every time you issue a variance, you open a door. And when you open a door to electronic signs that are 72 feet or 100 feet or whatever they are between now and September, October, when the next person comes in requesting a variance for an electronic sign, it's a lot harder for you guys to turn them down. It's not impossible, but it's a lot harder. So that might be something that can damage this community. We're not San Antonio. We don't want a bunch of mega churches. We don't want a bunch of mega signs. We love the churches that are here, but I think that we need to give the code review committee the opportunity to do their job, come up with the recommendations. If the ordinances are going to be changed, make those changes. Let the chamber, which has agreed to wait until these sign ordinances are reviewed, come back at that time. Like I say, maybe they need an ordinance, maybe they need a variance, maybe they don't. But at that time, we'll know what our city wants to do going forward, and you guys will have a better understanding of what the city wants, what the citizens want, because there will be public input to the changes to any sign ordinance that is made. And at that time, you'll have a better understanding of what this city wants to do and a better amount of information to make a decision on variances. That's my opinion. Thanks.
Any other comments? Yes, ma'am.
I just want to say that you were wondering.
Would you state your name and address, please?
Elsa Laura. I thought y'all knew that.
For the record.
For the record. And my address is 323 Roy Street. And y'all were wondering, they were saying that in the future, the loop could be 30 miles an hour. It could look like Sidney Baker. And I just want to refer again, like I did last time, to the Tivy sign at the Tivy Stadium. There's no need to wonder what the loop would look like if it looked like Sidney Baker, what that sign would, how the sign would affect it. So you can just drive right here on my way home. I drive by it every single day, that Tivy Stadium sign. I've never seen a big bad wreck because people were looking at the sign. You're worried about, someone else was worried about teenagers saying that they could look at the sign and be distracted, and how many people, how many teens drive on that road. But I have seen a lot of statistics about teenage driving, and 3,000 teenagers are killed texting. I've never seen a statistic for looking at a sign, teens killed looking at a sign. So I think they're going to be fine. I mean, as long as they don't look at that cell phone. And another gentleman mentioned a church that had followed all the rules for their size of their sign. I clean that church. I love that church. But that church is also located in a different location. It has it's a very small property. The sign is very small. It's low to the ground. And I feel like that's what variances are for, because our property's not tiny. It's not, there's no stoplight right next to our church like the sign that he was talking about. It's, you have to really have it fast, easy to read, and large, because if it's small, you're going to look at it, and then I don't know what y'all do, but I'm a bad driver, and I'll go, what was that? I'll have an accident on that road if it's not big enough and easy to read. So I do feel like your ordinance is very outdated. One of the rules on your ordinance is that a sign can't be for commercial purposes or include sponsorships. And the Tivy Stadium sign does. And I think it should, because they've done really good things with the money. They've given scholarships and things like that. I do feel like your ordinance is outdated. And a lot of mention has also been made about the 2050 plan. In 2050, I'll be 77 years old. There probably won't be needs for signs. We'll probably have them on our foreheads or something. I mean, I have no idea when I come in here with my little cane what things are going to be like in 2050. But I think we need to be, present in the future, have signs that are what we all want to see. I want to see the sign up. I'm excited about it. I'd be proud of it. And I think it looks good in the picture. I think it looks just right for the property. And I just wish you'd consider that. The safety of the kids driving on that road and the size of the sign is fine. Just drive down Sidney Baker, look at the Tivy Stadium sign. The colors are good. It's easy to read. I don't have an accident there. So I just wish you'd really consider saying yes.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, hearing none, I close the public hearing at 6:23. Comments from the commissioners? I'll make a comment then. Corey, I appreciate what you said. I agree that there's several reasons in there that a variance would be appropriate. The other thing I wrote down a long time ago, earlier before you mentioned it, is the perspective. Right now, say the chamber signs, I guarantee they can do a 100-foot sign, 32 feet, 32%. 200 feet is what they're asking, 72 square feet is 36%. Now, what we talked about in our discussion prior to getting into this agenda is that I think the consensus, at least here, we can't dictate what the committee's going to do, but it will come back here for approval. And I feel that percentages is maybe a best option. I've heard, we talk about 50% maybe being too high. You know, we certainly don't want anything maybe over that. This falls into the 30 to 40% range that we discussed here as commissioners. I feel comfortable at this point. Any comments?
No, I think that there are so many variables that are coming into play that we should allow the committee that is looking at the sign ordinance to get all the input in, not just 6 people on board and in a room full of community members. We need a larger pool to get input from when we're talking about implications 30, 40 years down the road. And so it's, I think that the sign ordinance can be improved, and I think that the public should have some input on what they feel would be appropriate, and until that happens, I'm not inclined to grant a variance really on any sign that comes before us until we have a better understanding of what the community as a whole wants to see.
I concur.
I echo what Garrett said. I think we identify a lot of things here tonight that we know there's issues. We know that some things need to be changed. Corey, you spoke very well on all of those things. And I think that's what we're so close to having this committee put together to make and address these things that we need to wait for those actions to take place.
Statement. I think the input that everybody made will affect the ultimate outcome of our sign ordinance. We're moving the ball down the field, but I'm inclined. I feel that this is too much of a variance. What we're tasked with to do are small variances that can, for unique situations that don't apply to a lot of other situations. And so I'm inclined to not approve the variance. But I feel in a few months, this may be a moot point. I really do. So,
do I have a motion?
I move that we deny this request for variance with the stipulation that it can be brought back and that we await the results of the study group and see how that impacts a new sign ordinance.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, raise your right hand. That passes 4-1. I vote no. Okay. Staff report.
As mentioned, the code review committee is going to meet in the next couple of weeks, looking at the draft zoning ordinance. That draft will be presented in open house on February 25th, and then come to the joint planning and zoning city council meeting on March 7th, which is your regular scheduled meeting in March. We are going to move your regular agenda to the March 21st date for our normal zone cases and so on that we have coming through the process.
Oh, code review, 25th.
Sorry, code
It'll be
review.
open house.
That'll be the open house for the public, and of course we'll broadcast more of that through city venues to show where that's going to be. I believe it's at the Diedert Center. I think it's 6 o'clock. Don't quote me on that. But we'll broadcast that out through our public information.
For the 25th.
The code review committee themselves are reviewing the draft.
Okay, that doesn't involve us at this point.
That's correct.
Okay. And we don't have our next meeting till March
Well, March 7th will be the joint planning commission and city council meeting for public comment for the preliminary zoning code.
What day is that?
March 7th.
That's our next meeting?
It's the next meeting.
That's joint PNC.
Correct. And then March 21st will be our regular agenda for March.
Okay.
So no meeting February 21st.
That's correct.
March the 7th was joint with who?
City council.
Okay, at 4:30 or?
Yes, at 4:30. And we'll get packets out to you guys sooner than later on that one so that you've got some time to review. I think our draft code's 160 pages, something like that.
Yeah, give us more than 2 days.
Just kind of a quick overview based on the comprehensive plan and the code review committee. Consultants and staff reviewing that have gone from the 40-something zoning districts we have to 17 or 18 districts. Kind of moving to more of a semi-stacking, semi-cumulative zoning. Residential districts will be relatively cumulative. Commercial districts will be cumulative, and then our special districts are kind of standalone. And then moving away from the geographical districts that we have now, the north, south, east, west, and central city districts, since most of those are similar zoning districts, but isolated to certain areas of town. So the goal was to simplify that and make it a little more user-friendly for the development. Kerrville continues to kind of reinvest rather than just continue to expand. So look forward to those dates. Of course, that'll go back with the public comment. Consultants will work in some of those comments. That'll go back to the code review committee and then back to you guys later on this summer.
Nothing else?
That's it.
If not, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Have a motion, have a second? Second, or adjourn?
Oof.